The glass doors opened with a soft whoosh. A young girl, no older than 12, stepped inside the bank. She walked slowly, carefully holding a white envelope close to her chest. Her clothes were clean but simple: jeans, sneakers, a bright yellow hoodie, a size too big. People inside barely noticed her at first, but when she reached the front desk, holding out her ID and check, everything changed. "Excuse me," she said politely. Her voice was soft. "I'd like to deposit this." The woman behind the counter gave her a quick glance, then looked again. The check was large, very large. The woman blinked, confused. She looked at the name on the check, then the girl's ID. "Is this a joke?" the woman said, laughing. The girl shook her head. "No, ma'am." The woman raised her hand and waved for a manager. A tall man in a navy blue suit came over, reading the check over her shoulder. His eyebrows went up. "You're saying this check belongs to you?" he asked, frowning. "Yes, sir," the girl said. "It's mine. I earned it." He looked at her ID again, then laughed. "Where'd you get it from, little lady?" "The Tooth Fairy." Behind them, someone in line chuckled. A woman pulled out her phone and started recording. Another whispered loudly, "Probably found it on the street." The girl stayed calm. "My name is Amara Jenkins," she said clearly. "That's my name on the check. That's my ID. I just want to deposit it into my account." The manager shook his head and smirked. "Right. And next you'll tell me you're a millionaire." Amara didn't respond. She just stood there, gripping the envelope. He turned to the front desk woman. "Call security. We're not doing this." "But sir," she whispered, "what if it's real?" He didn't care. Security was already walking over. A tall man in uniform stood behind her now. His arms were crossed, his eyes cold. "I need you to come with me," he said. "You're causing trouble here." Amara looked around. Everyone was staring, laughing. Some were whispering about her clothes. Others were looking at her skin. "Did she steal it?" someone said under their breath. The check in her hand suddenly felt heavier. But still, she didn't cry. She didn't shout. She didn't beg. Instead, she pulled out her phone. "Who are you calling?" the guard asked, clearly annoyed. "My father," she said simply. The manager laughed out loud. "Oh great, now she's calling her dad. What's he going to do? Yell at me over the phone?" Amara's fingers moved quickly on the screen. She held the phone to her ear. It rang once, twice. Then someone picked up. Amara took a deep breath. Then she said 4 simple words. "Daddy, they said I don't belong here." She didn't yell. She didn't sound angry. But something about the way she said it made the air in the bank change. She hung up the call. That was it. Just one call. 4 words. The manager looked confused. The security guard raised an eyebrow. "That's it," he said. "That's your big plan." Amara just smiled. "I think you'll want to stay here," she said softly. "My daddy, he usually doesn't like being disturbed during meetings. But for this, he'll come." "For this," the manager mocked her again. "Please. You're not special, kid." But he was wrong. And soon, the whole bank would find out just how wrong he was. Because Amara Jenkins wasn't just any little girl. And her father, well, let's just say, he didn't like it when someone messed with his daughter. And just like that, the storm broke. It didn't take long before her father's allies, powerful people who had been biding their time, began to strike back. One by one, the people who had tried to silence them began to fall. Whispers of corruption, fraud, and exploitation spread like wildfire through the media. The truth that had been buried for years was finally coming to light. But the battle was far from over. In the next few days, the full force of their enemies would come down on them. But her father's response was clear. He wasn't going to back down. He wasn't going to let them destroy his family, or her. The final confrontation came in the form of a public press conference. The press, the world, and the corrupt forces who had once believed they were untouchable were all watching. Her father stepped up to the podium, his voice calm but filled with the weight of everything that had led to this moment. "This is a message to anyone who thinks they can silence the truth," he said, looking directly into the camera. "No matter how powerful you think you are, no matter how far your reach extends, we will fight for what is right. We will never back down, and we will make sure that no one, ever, has to suffer like my daughter did." Amara stood beside him, her heart swelling with pride. For the first time, she felt the weight of their victory, the weight of standing up for what was right. Together, they had done the impossible. The room was silent. The world was silent. And in that silence, the truth rang louder than any threats ever could. Amara blinked, still trying to grasp what was happening. How is that even possible? How did they get the footage? Her father smiled, his eyes twinkling with a mix of pride and determination. "I made sure it would be recorded. In situations like this, the truth can't just be told by word of mouth. People need to see it for themselves. Once they do, they can't unsee it." Amara's head was spinning. The footage was already making its way into the media. In just a few hours, the entire city would know about the incident at the bank. It was inevitable now. The truth was out. Her father sat behind the desk and picked up his phone. "It's time for the next step. I want to make sure this doesn't just fade away." He dialed a number, and when the person on the other end picked up, he spoke in a calm but firm tone. "Get me the board. We're going to make sure the right people hear about this." Amara stood quietly as her father made the call. His voice was steady, his confidence undeniable. But beneath it all, she could see something else in his eyes, a glimmer of something much bigger, something much more powerful than she had imagined. It wasn't just about protecting her anymore. It wasn't just about one bank. This was about an entire system. A system that had allowed people to treat others as if they were invisible, unimportant. A system that had perpetuated inequality and exploitation. Her father was going to tear that system apart. "Everything's in motion now," he said, hanging up the phone and turning to her. "They're going to have to answer for what they've done." The bank was eerily quiet now. The only sound was the hum of the overhead lights and the soft shuffle of footsteps. Amara stood beside her father, her head held high, but her heart was racing. What had just happened felt like a whirlwind, one that had turned her life upside down in a single moment. But as her father calmly adjusted his suit and glanced around the bank, Amara realized he wasn't rattled. Not even a little. For him, this was nothing new. As they walked toward the door, several of the remaining bank employees watched them, eyes wide with awe and fear. They hadn't just seen a father protecting his daughter. They'd witnessed the unveiling of power. Outside, the morning sun bathed the street in a golden glow, but even that couldn't seem to ease the chill that had settled in the bank. The staff would be talking about today's events for a long time. No one would forget what had just happened. "I didn't expect that," Amara said, her voice still tinged with shock. Her father smiled gently, his hand resting on her shoulder as they stepped into the cool breeze. "I know. I had to make sure they understood the importance of respect." Amara nodded, though there was still something heavy on her mind. She had always known her father was powerful. She had always known he wasn't just any businessman. But to see him in action, commanding a room with nothing more than his presence, was different, and it had shaken her in a way she hadn't expected. The car they had arrived in was sleek and black, the kind of car you saw only in movies. It was more than just transportation, it was a symbol. As they got inside, Amara couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed. "Do you think they'll come after us?" she asked, looking out of the window. Her mind was still racing, replaying the scene in the bank over and over again. Her father's eyes remained fixed on the road ahead, his expression calm. "They won't dare." "You don't think this will get worse?" she pressed. "They'll probably try to deny it, cover it up. The bank, I mean." He chuckled softly, a deep, confident sound. "They can deny all they want, "Sweetheart, but the truth is undeniable. And truth, no matter how hard it is to accept, has a way of coming to light. No one can silence it forever." Amara turned to him, her curiosity piqued. "So, what happens next?" Her father looked at her, his expression shifting slightly, something between a smile and a serious look. "Next, the real work begins. We expose the system. We show people how things are supposed to be, not the way they've been tricked into thinking they are." The car pulled into a small, hidden garage, and they exited. As they walked up the steps to their home, Amara noticed how different everything felt. The lavish house that had always been a symbol of her father's success now felt different. It felt like a fortress. Inside, she was surprised to see her father's office door wide open. Normally, he would never leave it that way, especially after an event like the one that had just transpired. But when they stepped inside, Amara froze. A large screen covered one of the walls. It was showing footage of the bank incident, the manager's humiliation, the guards dragging him out, the stunned silence that had gripped the room after her father spoke. It was clear that someone had been recording everything. "This is being broadcast," her father said, his voice even, as he walked toward the desk. "It's already on the news, all over the city." The world was watching. What had started as a simple moment of injustice at a small local bank had quickly turned into a media storm. News outlets ran the story, with varying degrees of sensationalism. Social media exploded with opinions, debates, and a mix of support and outrage. Amara felt the weight of it all pressing down on her. She had expected the aftermath, but not like this. It started with the phone calls. Her father had warned her that once they exposed the truth, things would escalate quickly. And he wasn't wrong. Calls came in from reporters, government officials, even lawyers who were eager to either help or capitalize on the situation. But it wasn't the calls that rattled her. It was the hate. In just one day, the support that had poured in for them seemed to vanish. Online trolls flooded the comment sections of every news post about the incident, calling Amara's father a bully and a man who abused his power. Some accused him of orchestrating the entire situation just for attention. There were threats, too, ones that made Amara's heart race every time she checked her phone. Her father, however, was unfazed. He didn't just ignore the hate. He turned it into something far more dangerous. The media that had originally painted him as a hero were now portraying him as a villain. But it didn't matter. His goal wasn't fame or praise. It never had been. It was to expose the system, and that system was starting to show cracks. Sitting in the family room, Amara looked at her father. The calm expression on his face as he read the newspaper didn't match the intensity of the storm that raged around them. "Are you really okay with this?" she asked softly, staring at the screen of her phone. A new wave of hate had just hit. He put the paper down, his eyes locking onto hers. "Amara, when you expose corruption, it doesn't come without resistance. You think they're going to just roll over and let the truth win. It's never that easy." "But the backlash," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "I didn't think it would be like this." Her father leaned forward, his expression now serious, but still filled with a quiet strength. "This is the price of change. People fight to hold on to the way things are because it benefits them. But the truth has its own power, Amara. It has a way of breaking down walls, whether people like it or not." Despite his words, Amara couldn't shake the feeling of unease. She had never seen her father in a position like this before. He was always calm, always confident. But now, even he couldn't avoid the growing tension in the air. The pressure was building, and it felt like something was about to snap. Later that afternoon, the phone rang again. This time, it wasn't a reporter. It wasn't a lawyer, either. The voice on the other end was low, deep, and filled with a sense of authority. "Mr. Johnson, we need to talk." Amara's father paused, his eyes narrowing as he listened. She could feel the change in the atmosphere, a shift in his mood that was almost imperceptible. He stood, walking toward the window, his back to her. "I've been expecting this," he muttered, more to himself than to her. He then picked up the phone. "Who is this?" The voice on the other end chuckled darkly. "You know exactly who this is, and you've been causing quite a stir. You've made your point. But now, it's time for the real game to begin." Her father's expression darkened. "What do you want?" "I think you know. It's not about what I want. It's about what you need. And you're going to find out just how far you're willing to go to protect your little girl." The threat was obvious, the undertones chilling. Amara's heart skipped a beat. Who was this person? What did they want from them? Before her father could respond, the line went dead. Her father stood there for a moment, the phone still in his hand, before he set it down slowly. Amara could see the change in his face. For the first time since this entire ordeal started, there was a hint of worry in his eyes. But just as quickly, it disappeared, replaced by the calm resolve that always came with his decisions. "You need to stay safe, Amara," he said quietly, turning to face her. "We're about to enter dangerous territory." Amara stood frozen, unsure of what he meant, but the urgency in his voice made her stomach churn. "Dad, who was that?" she asked, her voice shaky. "Is everything all right, Mr. O'Hara?" A calm, authoritative voice came through the line. "I was informed that there seems to be some sort of situation with a young lady named Amara Jenkins. What's going on?" The bank manager's face drained of color. "I don't know, sir. There's a misunderstanding." He stopped when he heard a loud click from the phone. He turned his head to see the man standing beside Amara. Her father, still calm, had just placed his own phone down. He stared at the manager. "I don't think you're in a position to make excuses anymore," he said coolly. "I'm afraid the real question is, do you even know who you're speaking to?" The manager's eyes darted around the room. It was clear now. This man, he wasn't just some random father. This was someone important, someone who had the power to change everything. Suddenly, the bank doors opened again. More suited men stepped inside, followed by a few familiar faces on TV. The truth was coming. The world was about to know. And Amara, she was standing right in the middle of it. The atmosphere at home had changed. The once quiet household now felt like a pressure cooker, every moment filled with tension. Amara couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something far bigger than any of them had expected. Her father had always been calm in the face of challenges, but now she saw something different in him. His calmness was a shield, hiding the storm brewing inside. The call from the mysterious voice had shaken him more than he let on. He had made some calls of his own, and while he hadn't shared the details with Amara, she knew something was in motion. Something dangerous. Every day since the media storm had started, the threats had escalated. The hate mail, the anonymous calls, even strange cars parked across the street. It was all becoming too much. But what worried Amara the most was how her father had begun distancing himself. He no longer joined her for dinner. He spent long hours on the phone, his words clipped and his expression unreadable. Amara tried to talk to him, but he brushed her off, telling her to focus on her schoolwork, telling her to stay out of the spotlight. It was clear he didn't want her to know how far he had gone to protect her, but nothing could stop the storm that was coming. One afternoon, as Amara sat on the porch, trying to escape the chaos inside, she saw a black SUV pull up in front of their house. It wasn't the first time she'd seen strange vehicles, but this one felt different. The car came to a stop, and two men in suits stepped out. One of them looked familiar, the same man who had been with her father during the interviews weeks before. The other man was taller, with cold eyes and a stern demeanor. They approached the door, and Amara's heart raced. She didn't need to be told that this was no casual visit. She watched as her father opened the door and greeted them with a strained smile. There was no warmth, no comfort in his voice, only a quiet determination. "Mr. Johnson," the taller man said, his voice low and dangerous. "We need to talk." Amara couldn't hear the conversation, but she could see the way her father's expression changed. It was like he was bracing for impact. He nodded, and then the three of them disappeared into the living room. Amara waited, her heart thumping in her chest, as the minutes stretched into an eternity. Her mind raced. Who were these men? What did they want with her father? She had seen her father face threats before, but this felt different. This was personal. Finally, the door opened, and the men left, but her father stayed inside, the door closing softly behind them. Amara rushed inside, her curiosity getting the best of her. She found him sitting at the kitchen table, his head in his hands. He looked exhausted, older, as if the weight of the world had settled on his shoulders. "Dad?" Amara's voice was tentative, filled with concern. He looked up at her, his eyes heavy. "Amara," he said softly, "I need you to listen to me very carefully." She sat down across from him, nervous, afraid of what he was about to say. "There's something you need to know," he continued, his voice tight with a mixture of fear and resolve. "The people behind all of this, behind what happened to you at that bank, are more powerful than I thought. They're not just some small-time players. They control everything. And now they're coming for us." Amara's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean, coming for us?" Her father took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "I made a mistake, Amara. I thought I could handle this on my own. But I was wrong. These people will stop at nothing to silence us, and I don't know if we're going to make it out of this unscathed." Tears welled in Amara's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had always admired her father's strength, his unshakable confidence, but now she saw a man who was afraid. And that fear was infectious. "What are we going to do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Her father stood up, pacing the room. "We fight back," he said, his voice gaining strength. "We fight with everything we have, Amara. But we do it smart. We don't back down. We don't let them control us." His words were filled with resolve, but Amara could see the pain in his eyes. He was doing this for her, for their family, but at what cost? Before Amara could respond, her phone buzzed on the table. It was a message from an unknown number. She opened it, her hands trembling. The message was short and to the point. "We know what you're doing. You're not going to win." Her father looked over her shoulder, his eyes narrowing when he saw the message. "This is just the beginning," he said darkly. Amara felt a chill run down her spine. The fight had only just begun, and already the enemy was closing in. But one thing was clear. She wasn't going to let her father face this alone. Not now, not ever. The next few days were a blur of phone calls, meetings, and a growing sense of urgency. Her father had gone underground, meeting with allies who could help them fight back. But Amara knew that whatever was coming next was going to be bigger than anything they had faced before. She had no idea how they were going to win. But as she looked at her father, determined and unyielding, she knew one thing for sure. They weren't going down without a fight. "You should have known," Amara's father replied calmly, his gaze never leaving the manager. "And you should have respected my daughter. She didn't deserve this. No one deserves to be humiliated in public, especially not for something they've worked so hard for." The bank staff and the few remaining customers who had witnessed the scene exchanged nervous glances. The tension in the room was unbearable. Suddenly, Amara's father turned to the two security guards, still standing by the entrance, their eyes wide and uncomfortable. "Take him out," he said, nodding to the manager. Without another word, the two men in black moved swiftly, grabbing the manager by the arms and dragging him out of the bank. The man didn't struggle. He couldn't. As they left, one of the remaining bank employees whispered to another, "Do you think he'll come back?" Amara's father didn't respond to the question. Instead, he turned back to his daughter, a soft smile playing on his lips. "Are you okay now, Amara?" he asked again. She nodded, her eyes bright. "I'm fine, Daddy. Thank you." The staff around them were still in shock, but they were beginning to understand who they were dealing with. They had just witnessed something that would shake the bank, and possibly the entire city, to its core. Amara's father straightened his tie and looked at the bank manager's empty desk, his expression unreadable. "You know, Amara, there's always a way to make things right. And when people don't listen, sometimes the only thing they understand is the truth." The truth had just walked into the bank. "It doesn't matter," he replied firmly, though his eyes were distant. "What matters now is that we keep moving forward. You can't show weakness in situations like this. Not now." Amara nodded, though the weight of his words felt like a stone in her chest. The stakes were higher than ever now. She had known that things would change when the truth came out. But she hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected the very people who had tried to oppress them to fight back with such ferocity. But one thing was clear now. Her father wasn't backing down. The world had been shaken by the revelation. But now, as threats began to swirl around them, it was obvious that the fight had only just begun. And Amara knew deep down that the journey ahead wouldn't just be about exposing corruption. It would be about survival. Her father wasn't just taking on the system anymore. He was preparing for a battle that would change everything. The bank was now frozen in time. Every pair of eyes in the room was locked on Amara and her father. No one dared to move. No one dared to breathe too loudly. The tension was so thick, it could have been sliced with a knife. The man who stood next to Amara was not just a father. He was something more. The security guards, once calm and stoic, now stood nervously at attention. They knew something was coming. They could feel it. "I'm not sure you all understand," the tall man said, his voice low and controlled, "but you've made a grave mistake today." His gaze swept the room. "Mocking my daughter was the last mistake you'll make." The manager, his face pale and his hands trembling, stepped back from the desk, unsure of what to do next. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected any of this. You're threatening me," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Amara's father didn't move a muscle. He just stared at him, his eyes steady and unblinking. "I'm not threatening you. I'm giving you a chance to make this right." He turned slightly to Amara, his expression softening just for a moment. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" Amara nodded, still calm. "I'm fine, Daddy." She knew what was happening. She'd been ready for this moment for a long time. All her life, she had heard stories about what her father could do, what he had done. But seeing it unfold in front of her, seeing the shock in the eyes of the people around her, it was different. The manager, still frozen in disbelief, took a step forward. Who are you?" he asked again, his voice wavering. "I don't understand. This isn't real, is it?" Amara's father smiled coldly. "I'm the one who made sure your bank stays afloat. I'm the one who makes decisions that affect more than just the state of this little bank. In fact, you could say I'm the reason this bank exists at all." The words were spoken with such finality, with such authority, that they hit everyone in the room like a slap in the face. The security guards looked at each other, unsure how to respond. They'd never been trained for something like this. I don't believe you," the manager stammered. His face was a mask of confusion and fear. "You're just some random guy." The tall man shook his head. "No, I'm not just some guy. I'm someone who has been watching this bank for a long time. Someone who has made very clear who holds the power here. And today, you chose to mock the wrong person." One of the men in black suits, who had been standing quietly in the background, stepped forward. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device, a black tablet. He tapped it a few times, and immediately, the bank manager's face went from pale to green. The man with the tablet held it out to the manager. "Take a look." The manager hesitated for a moment, but then took the tablet. He couldn't believe his eyes. On the screen, there was a photo of a man. Amara's father, no doubt about it. But with it was a headline: "The man who owns half the city's banks." The manager's eyes widened. This isn't real," he said, shaking his head. "This is a joke." But the man in black didn't laugh. "Do you think that's a joke?" he asked calmly. "Do you think the man standing in front of you, who holds more power than you can imagine, is just some guy?" He glanced at Amara's father, who gave a small nod. "This is not a joke," Amara's father said. His voice was firm now, the power in his words undeniable. "I own everything here, and I've been patient with your bank. With you." The manager's hands were shaking. He dropped the tablet, his legs buckling as he fell to the floor. I didn't know," he muttered, his eyes wide with terror. "I had no idea." Amara stood quietly, her hands folded in front of her, waiting. Her calmness contrasted sharply with the chaos around her. People in the bank were still laughing. Some were making rude comments, and the manager was pacing back and forth behind the counter. But Amara didn't care. She had already made the call. And now, it was time to wait. The seconds stretched on like hours. The manager finally stopped pacing and stepped closer to her. "You're still here," he said, a sneer on his face. "Do you really think someone's going to come and fix this? That your dad's going to show up and make everything magically okay?" Amara didn't answer. She just stared at him, her eyes calm and steady. "You're wasting my time, kid," he muttered, rolling his eyes. At that moment, the bank doors swung open. 2 black SUVs pulled up outside, followed by a black limousine. The sound of the engines roared for a moment, then stopped. The doors opened. Security personnel in dark suits stepped out first. They didn't look like normal security guards. They were different. Faster, more alert, like they were expecting something big. They moved quickly, clearing the area around the entrance. Amara's heart didn't race. She knew what was happening. The people around her, though, were starting to feel it. A quiet panic began to spread. "Who are these people?" the manager whispered to himself, his voice barely audible. "Why are they here?" Amara didn't answer, but the look in her eyes was enough to tell him. "You should have listened." The first man in the black suit walked inside the bank. He was tall, with broad shoulders, but there was something about him that was commanding. He walked with purpose, like he owned the place. His eyes scanned the room, taking everything in. His gaze landed on Amara. "Is she the one?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. "Yes, sir," one of the other men responded, stepping forward. "She's the one." The manager's eyes widened. He stepped forward, but quickly froze when the man looked at him. "You are the one who caused this problem?" the tall man asked, his voice cold. "I," the manager started, but his words trailed off. He couldn't seem to find the courage to speak. "Answer him," one of the men in black demanded, his voice sharp. "Was it you who mocked the child?" The manager opened his mouth, but no words came out. He felt small, powerless, as the atmosphere around him grew more intense. Then, the door to the back office opened. A figure stepped out from the shadows. Amara didn't have to look up. She already knew who it was. The man who had just walked in. He was tall, dressed in a sleek black suit, his tie tucked perfectly into his collar. His skin was dark, his eyes intense, but there was a calmness about him that made everyone else feel nervous. He looked at the manager for a long moment before turning his attention to Amara. "You must be Amara," the man said gently, his voice a little softer than the rest of the security teams. "How are you holding up?" Amara smiled just a little. "I'm fine, Daddy." The manager's jaw dropped. Who is this?" he stammered, finally finding his voice. The man didn't look at the manager, but his words were cold and final. "I'm her father," he said simply. The manager blinked in disbelief. "Why, you're her father? You're just a normal guy. Who are you?" Amara's father gave him a hard look. "I am someone who has never been mocked over what's mine," he said, his tone flat but carrying an undertone of power. "You've made a mistake." The bank suddenly felt like it had grown smaller, suffocating. The staff shifted uncomfortably, some looking at each other, unsure what to do next. The air seemed to crackle with tension. "You think you can just show up here, mock my daughter, and get away with it?" Her father continued, his voice rising slightly. "I don't care who you are, or what you think you can do. You've crossed a line." The manager opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The sound of his voice seemed to have disappeared. "You," he began again, but he was interrupted by the sound of a phone ringing in his pocket. He looked down at it. His phone. He quickly answered, trying to sound calm. "Yes," he said, his voice trembling. The tension in the air was unbearable. Every day felt like a countdown to something inevitable. Amara had never felt this close to danger, but now she knew that everything they had been through, every threat, every piece of evidence, every move, had led to this moment. The enemy wasn't just going to disappear. They weren't going to give up, not now that they had the upper hand. Her father had made countless phone calls, assembled allies from the deepest corners of his network, but every time they thought they had a lead, it turned into a dead end. The people who were pulling the strings behind her humiliation at the bank were more powerful than they had anticipated. They controlled money, information, and people at the highest levels, and their reach seemed endless. But they had underestimated one thing: her father. He had always been quiet about his connections, the true extent of his power. But now that the danger had come to their door, he had begun to make his move. They couldn't stop him from uncovering the truth. They couldn't silence him as easily as they had hoped. Amara sat at the kitchen table, her eyes glued to her phone as she watched the news. The whole story had become national news, then global. The world knew about the young black girl at the bank who had been humiliated, the girl whose father was now being hailed as a hero. But behind the scenes, the real battle was just beginning. And then the phone rang. It wasn't a number she recognized. She hesitated, glancing at her father, who was pacing nervously in the living room. He'd been making calls all morning, but none of them had led anywhere. They were running out of time. Amara answered the phone. "Hello." There was a brief silence on the other end before a cold, calculated voice spoke. "Miss Johnson, I trust you've enjoyed the attention. It won't last much longer. You and your father have stirred up more trouble than you realize. It's time to put an end to this." Her stomach dropped. The voice was unfamiliar, but the tone was unmistakable. This was the same group behind everything that had happened. The people who had made her father's life a living nightmare. "What do you want?" Amara's voice trembled, but she refused to let them hear her fear. The voice on the other end chuckled, the sound mocking. "What do we want? We want you to know that there's no winning this. You don't understand the forces you're up against. You're nothing but pawns." Amara felt her father's presence in the room with her, his eyes piercing into hers. He had heard the conversation, and there was no mistaking the fire in his gaze. He didn't look scared. Not anymore. He looked furious. "I won't let you hurt her," he said, his voice firm, unwavering. The voice on the other end responded coldly. "We already have. You've crossed a line. You and your precious daughter will regret this." Amara could feel her father's hand on her shoulder. He didn't say anything, but the silence between them spoke volumes. He had been preparing for this. This moment had been coming for a long time, and now it was finally here. The battle wasn't just about Amara's dignity anymore. It was about their family's survival. With a deep breath, her father took the phone from her and spoke in a calm, steady voice. "You've made a grave mistake. You've underestimated me. You've underestimated us." The voice on the other end of the line scoffed. "What can you possibly do? You're just one man. And she's just a girl." Her father's response was simple, but it carried a weight that made the air around them shift. "You'll find out soon enough." He hung up without another word, his expression hardening. Amara could see the battle in his eyes. He was done being pushed around, done letting them control the narrative. He turned to her, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "It's time. Amara, I'm going to make sure they never hurt you again." Amara nodded, fear and pride mixing in her chest. She had never seen her father like this before. This was a man who was willing to fight, willing to sacrifice everything for the people he loved. "I'm with you," she said quietly.